Welcome to week 3 of the Pantry Challenge here at the Hometown Homestead. I don't know about where you are, but it has been an amazingly bitterly cold week, and we made all sorts of amazing comfort foods to keep us warm here inside, as well as some awesome carnivore wins that I tried for the first time. So let's dive in and see how it all went down. We are starting off week 3 with something we have been very excitedly awaiting that finally arrived after a crazy cross-country trip to finally get here. That is my new green pan waffle maker that I splurged on with my Christmas money. I decided to go for the big one, knowing just how many I would be responsible for making every single time we decided to have waffles or chaffles, which I'm making both in this video. And we are super happy with it so far. So good thumbs up there. The recipe itself is from the Grits and Grains website, which uses freshly milled flour to make these waffles. It has no sugar and no honey, but they were still really, really delicious, and the kids love them. As a matter of fact, we're making a double batch, so we can save the leftovers, freeze them, and then the kids can easily go back and have them for the rest of the week. That worked out so well, and we'll definitely be doing that again. And just like any new kitchen gadget would, this waffle maker brought all of the help to the kitchen to make sure they were involved in the process. So here you can see sister is jumping in. She loves helping me mix up recipes, but again, I think the waffle maker was more the pull on this one. I'll take any help I can get. I always love having the kids in the kitchen because what they are doing right now will set them up for a lifetime of knowing that they can make anything from scratch as long as they set their mind to it and have a properly stocked kitchen. So with that said, mixing this up, pouring in the buttermilk, the recipe itself called for 6 to 8 cups of milk. Now that was dependent on the weather, of course, all of the factors that go into that. I did not need the 8 cups, and going forward, I will not mix the whole 8 cups of buttermilk, just in an effort to make sure that I'm not wasting any extra that I have around there. Needless to say, these waffles were a huge hit, and we had plenty left over that we were able to freeze and set aside for the following mornings throughout the week. Now, right here, my son is preparing our venison to go into the dehydrator so that we have some deer jerky to take with us for their marathon day of ball games on this blustery, cold Saturday where we're not going to have time or just the interest in getting out in the nasty cold to find some decent food in between their games. We had games every other hour all day long, so making our own jerky was a nice addition. We threw that in the dehydrator and it turned out great, serving the purpose perfectly. Another request from my guy was to make the braided bread. We have not been making bread at our house, but it is so cold and gross, and it just was something they've been asking for quite a while. So I decided to go ahead and make them the bread, even if I wasn't going to eat it myself. This recipe for challah comes straight out of Sue Becker's home ground flour cookbook, which I feel like is really a great introduction to home ground flour if that's something that you're just getting into. A few of our absolute staple recipes definitely come straight out of that cookbook. So at this point, I'm mixing in the yeast, adding some extra flour. These recipes always vary in flour, again, just depending on the humidity of your house and how everything is moving. So that is something that makes making bread a little bit more difficult for some. You really have to be able to get their fingers in there and feel it. And I will confess that is something that I have missed. I do love putting my hands in some nice dough, and I was kind of all too happy to make this braided bread for my son after that request came in. So now I'm going to put the lid on and let it proof for a couple hours, let it get nice and bubbly. In the meantime, my sourdough starter is something that I have neglected over the summer, and it's time to bring it back if the kids are going to be asking for bread. I love the benefits of the fermentation that comes along with it. I feel like it helps to break the grains down and make them more easily digestible. But in addition to that, it's just something that is really handy to have around during a pantry challenge. So I mixed 50 grams of flour, 50 grams of water, and put my cheesecloth on top. And I'm just leaving it over by the stove, and I'll feed that every 24 hours for the first 3 days. But at this point, that dough has been rising and is to a good state. So I went ahead and punched it down, scooping it out here on my counter. I do want to talk just briefly about my counter. I noticed in one of the last videos that it looked like it had some spots on it. This counter is a little bit of a rough texture on purpose. We wanted it to look old and lived in, just like our house. It was actually built in 1907, so it has a few years on it. As a result, though, it really isn't the single best place to put a bread together or a dough that you need to be super smooth, because it does have that texture of the countertop in it. I don't personally mind that. If I did, I would just go ahead and get another piece of marble or something similar, so I had a nice flat surface there, or just do it in my on my baking center, which does have the marble, but this works just fine. So I cut the dough in half. I'm making 2 separate 3-strand braids here. I've done a 4-strand in the past and it turns out beautiful, but just for the sake of easy right now, because I do have a dinner to put together, I'm going with the 3-strand. I'm putting both of these on my baking stone. Next time I bake these off, I won't put them both there together, because you can see as they plumped up there, it was a very full pan and it was a little bit hard to get them off afterwards. Now to go with it, we are making one of the favorite soups for my kids that we've had around our house in a long time. This is a recipe from the Blue Apron website way back in the day, before I was interested or really knew much about doing a ton of home cooking. We used to get the Blue Apron boxes in our mail, and this is one of the recipes that came with it. At the time, you got the recipe card to keep, and we knew quickly that this recipe was going to hang around. So this is the Thai chicken noodle soup, and you're seeing me use the leftover chicken that I had from last week's spatchcock chicken, which was actually just a couple days before the recipe you're seeing now. I also pulled out some canned mushrooms, chopped them up, and I'm adding them in a pan with some oil, some frozen carrots, some onions, and that is curry. The chicken itself won't go in until a little bit later, but right now all of those ingredients are being sauteed in the pan to get them nice and browned before adding in the chicken. Now, I don't keep on hand all of the ingredients that this recipe calls for. If you're familiar all with Thai cooking, you know there's usually some crazy ingredients. I don't have, for example, a golden mountain sauce, but there is a way to make a similar version just using soy sauce, chicken stock, and a little bit of sugar. So I'm able to pull together something very similar out of my pantry. I do keep coconut milk on hand. I've had it for quite a while. So that's one of the reasons that I added this to our pantry challenge meals, because we need to move through some of that coconut milk, because like I said, it's been in there for quite a while. As the soup comes together, the bread is ready to come out, but it actually isn't complete. What I'm doing right now is adding the egg wash. The recipe said to do it right from the beginning, but I've noticed that sometimes when I do that, I feel like the bread gets a little bit more brown than I'm looking for. So I'm adding the egg wash with just maybe 10 minutes left and getting that completed, while my son adds another can of coconut milk to the soup. He really is an amazing help in the kitchen, and I have to say, I'm not sure that I realized exactly how much he's in there and how much he's doing until I started filming everything that goes on and watching back what all he's contributing in the kitchen. Now, jumping back to the soup, since the bread is back in the oven to finish off, what I'm doing now is adding the noodles. This recipe calls for them to be cooked in a separate dish, but I'm all about one pot meals when I can do it, and this soup isn't going to last long around here. So I'm going to go ahead and cook the noodles in the broth itself. I like to break them up in the package so they're not super long and hard for the kids to handle. And then I just go ahead and throw them in the pot, stir them in, and you're gonna see me also add the spinach that I put in top. I don't keep bok choy around either, so spinach makes a nice substitute for that. Using frozen spinach makes it nice and easy. And when you have the noodles, the hard noodles, as well as the spinach, all you need to do is give it a stir, turn off the burner, put the lid on for exactly 4 minutes. And when you open it up, the spinach is beautifully steamed. The noodles are perfectly tender. Nothing is overdone or gummy, and you don't have to worry about them setting off in a separate pan and getting gummy. And you are ready to serve, which is absolutely perfect in my house. So the recipe itself does call for some garnish of green onion, and I wish I had it, but we're not going to the store. So with that said, I'm just adding our lime essential oil. If you have limes on hand, squeezing a lime or tossing one on top is absolutely beautiful. But if you don't, just using the essential oil itself adds all the flavor that you need without needing to keep limes on hand that easily go bad quicker than I can get around to using them. Between the braided bread and one of their favorite soups, everybody was super happy with how this night turned out, even though it was Friday night. So this was actually in place of pizza, which is a huge family favorite. Now it is Saturday morning, it is ball game day, and we are up for a big breakfast to keep the guys full. Like I mentioned, this is a very long one for us, much longer than normal. So the first thing out was a fried egg for one of the ballers and tiny eggs for little sister. Before I go ahead and make the third version of eggs, I know it seems like I'm kind of a short order cook. When it comes to eggs, that's actually true. If somebody wants them scrambled, somebody wants them fried, and somebody wants them tiny or whatever, I'm going to do it because eggs don't take long. They're so full of protein and vitamins, and I'm always super happy to make sure the kids are full and starting off their day with something that's going to last them as far as energy goes, instead of something carb heavy that they're just going to be, often asking for more in just a little bit of time. So this is the mommy eggs, sausage, onions sauteed, adding the eggs in. Feta goes on half. One guy doesn't like that. But again, whatever they want to get them full and hungry before we're off to their ball game day is exactly what we're going to do. We did go ahead and bag up that jerky that we started the night before. It turned out great and was a big hit for them as we traveled throughout the rest of the day. Now, when I handed over this plate, it didn't take long for somebody to see the heart shape. That was an accident. I did not purposefully design heart-shaped eggs for breakfast, but hey, you know what? I'll take the win when I can. This is the next night. We are making an amazing quick pho, which is really, really delicious. I'm using the pork bone. If any of you saw my Carnivore video where I canned up the seared pork, this is the bone that I pulled out of that pot. And it is really, really going to turn into something beautiful here in just a minute. I'm adding water and the bone to the Instapot, and I'm going to put it over and put it on high pressure for around 30 minutes to make this broth come together. And in the meantime, we're going to take the little bit of extra time that we have to quickly feed our sourdough starter. So if you haven't fed a sourdough starter before, the first thing I'm going to do is weigh it. I'm taking out 50 grams, and I'm going to use 50 grams of the day one starter, 50 grams of clear filtered water, no chlorine because you don't want to damage the yeast that you're trying to capture, and 50 grams of my home ground flour. You can use just regular store-bought flour. Whatever you start your starter with, it will really very generously feed on that. So it's kind of hard sometimes to switch over from different flours, but this is going to be super simple for me just to keep up with what I have going on here. So you're seeing the 50 grams go in. So equal parts starter, flour, and water is what works for me. I know other people do it different ways, and it really is so independent. That is the neat thing about sourdough. As scientific as some people want to get, it can be as simple or complicated as you want to make it. So mixing it up, I'm going to put that same piece of cheesecloth back on, the same lid, and get it back over on the stove so it is ready to go for another 24 hours. What I love about sourdough is being able to squeeze it into the tiny cracks of your day. It doesn't have to be complicated, and it really does fit in with life. So now we're heading back to dinner. That is ginger and onion. I'm putting them in a hot pan that's been preheated to let them kind of caramelize and start to kind of release their flavors into the pan itself. Once they start to brown and I start to get a good char on them, I'm going to go ahead and start adding the additional ingredients needed to make the broth. You can see some good color coming up right there on my onion. I'm going to add some water to the pot, as well as the pork broth that I have left over from my Carnivore pork, plus the broth that I'm making over in the Instapot. I'm also adding fish sauce. Again, when you're making a food that's kind of Eastern, Asian, those Thai recipes have a lot of different ingredients. So fish sauce, soy sauce, often sesame oil, hoisin sauce. Those things are stuff that I've gained over time, but they're often substitutes or the ability to simply leave them out if you don't have them on hand. I'm also adding just a little bit of hot sauce. I am using way less than the recipe calls for because I do have small children eating it, but that's totally up to your discretion and what works for your family. I will make sure to link this recipe down below too. Typically something like this takes all day to set and simmer to get those delicious flavors, but we found that this recipe turns out really, really nice with just making a quick version over on the stove. You can make this recipe using any ingredient of your choice. It doesn't have to be pork. I've done it with canned brisket before. I've also used chicken. So just whatever protein that you have available will work super well for something like this. Now we're about to get to the question that I got hundreds of times on the Carnivore video, which is how did the pork turn out and what was the outcome? Did searing make a difference? And I have to say, this pork smells fabulous. It looks fabulous. It is so juicy and it is still super tender. I might have ate a lot of it just like that with a little extra salt, and I'm not sad about it at all. We actually opened an additional jar today, and we just keep going back for more. It is really, really good, and I do think the searing made a difference. Now, right now, I'm using another round of those brown rice noodles. This time, I'm making them in a separate pan. The reason I'm doing that is because I'm scooping out all of those big ingredients that we've had simmering in there, which is why I cut the onions and the ginger into really large pieces. It was to make them easy to come right out of this pan. We want a really clear broth, and cooking the noodles off in a separate pan gives us the ability to do that. And now I'm adding that pork straight into the broth itself because it needs to be warmed up to be ready to go for the soup. And as you can see there's some of that delicious broth still in the bottom of the jar that I can add straight into the broth itself. So giving it a good stir. Again, the noodles in the back I cooked the same way. Boiled the water, turned it off, put a lid on, set a timer for 4 minutes, and then we are ready to go here. So to get this plated up, or bowled up, should I say, noodles go in first, the broth and the pork second. Again, another place where green onions make an awesome garnish, as well as a lime wedge, some bean sprouts, fresh if you've got them, canned if you don't. That's what we're doing here. Water chestnuts would be great. And again, lime oil at our house because we don't have those fresh ingredients on hand. So in order to stretch the pantry, that's what we're doing. This one was another big hit and an old family favorite. It's great to be able to use your canned proteins. So if you don't have canned protein or you're not interested in canning, I really recommend considering it because being able to pull together something like this with broth on the shelf and a protein off the shelf really comes together really quick and easy and makes a delicious meal that everyone enjoys. And here it is, friends. This is the real reason that a waffle maker was so high on my list. I wanted to make a chaffle and see if it was really as good as I've been hearing from all of my carnivore friends. And I have to tell you, it didn't disappoint. This is basically a carnivore version of a waffle. It uses shredded mozzarella cheese as well as eggs to make a nice batter. Now, I know that sounds super simple and like it would be really odd, but these ingredients are also what I put together to make my carnivore pizza crust. So I had high hopes just by changing up the ratio and adding a little more egg than cheese that I could come up with something really delicious. I have to say, I was super surprised by how fluffy this thing came out once it was done in the waffle maker. Now, I did put it on kind of a medium darkness and not super crispy. And going forward, I will add more color and more crisp to the settings on my waffle maker just to make sure that I get a little bit more crunch in the texture because it came out super soft. I attribute that to the egg and cheese. With those two ingredients both being soft, it's easy to see how that happened, but there wasn't kind of that crispy crust that I was looking for in a waffle. When I made these again later in the week, I was able to achieve that. The waffles themselves turned out really, really good. They were actually pretty bread-like, which was shocking. And in addition to that, just adding some huge chunks of butter turned out extra delicious. Now, for those that want to be dirty carnivore or cheat just a little bit, you can add a tiny touch of maple syrup or some sort of honey type of a sweetener. But if you're wanting to keep it super clean carnivore, then just adding the butter is really, really good. And I definitely recommend it. This also makes a great crust. If you want to make a quick pizza, just freeze up some extra of these little chaffles, and then you're ready to go when you need something as simple, or if you're looking for a bread for some sort of a sandwich. This is something that I'll be making going forward as a go-to to have to use in those situations because it was really, really good. We have had this stash of corn in my freezer for over a year. This freezer itself was actually known as the corn freezer for quite a while because of how much we put in there. My brother grows the most amazing corn every year, and we actually sold quite a bit for him. We live a little distance away, so our house became a drop-off point, and as a result, we got a lot of extra. Some of it we canned, some of it we went ahead and shucked and froze, but the rest, we listened to him, and he said, leave it in the feed sacks and throw it in the freezer and don't do a thing to it. We brought these up, we pulled off some of the really loose parts of the husk, left the rest on, and stuck them frozen straight into the oven on the racks. I put them in for 30 minutes and they weren't quite done. I had them at 350 and I ended up putting them back in after testing them out at the end of the 30 minutes with the pork to go with it. We're making one of my favorite carnivore meals, which is this beautiful pork loin. I got one of the huge ones from Sam's, cut it in thirds, and then vacuum sealed it so we could have the portions as needed. What I found is that getting the meat as dry as possible before you season it up and sear it off on the cast iron skillet is the key to making a delicious crust and having the flavors all locked inside of the meat itself. So I'm using my large cast iron skillet here, and that was bacon grease. That's a carnivore staple, right? If I'm going to be making bacon all the time, save the grease and use it to do things just like this. My kiddos are a huge fan of pork loin, but I thought when I cut this that I could get 3 perfectly sized out of this in order to have some extra leftovers for myself to eat in days following. It worked out the first time, but it did not work out this night. That said, in the future, I'll just cut that big boy in 2. Now, here you see it going in after the sear is complete with the corn, and then I'm pulling out the corn here before the pork is complete itself. I will say I read the directions and I totally messed this one up. The pork should have gone in way ahead of the corn. I think the recipe that I was looking at just wasn't based on the size of loin that I had, and I missed that detail. So here we are going to end up having the corn, as you can see, turned out great. Some of the bread that we made earlier, and then this is a sneak peek. This is the grape jelly that we're going to be making in our January video that's coming out this Friday to go along with the Sutton's Days January collaboration. I made it with Pomona's pectin and honey instead of sugar, and it turned out really, really good. So the kids couldn't wait to try it. I have one girl who's got some really loose teeth, and she loves corn. So instead of just taking a big bite and losing that front tooth, she asked me to cut it off the cob for her. So the kids are going ahead to get started on their corn as well as on the bread and salad while the pork finishes off. Not only did I underestimate the amount of time it was going to take for the pork, but I underestimated the size of the corn appetite of this crew. I was surprised that the baby took down more than one of these cobs herself, and everybody else come back for seconds and even thirds. So 8 years for my crew is not going to do it going forward. But the good news is we have that amazing freezer downstairs that still has tons and tons of corn. So you're going to see this make an appearance again before we're done with the pantry challenge. From my personal experience, this is definitely the easiest way to preserve corn as well as the best way to prepare it even over a year down the road. So I really, really do love how the corn turned out. The pork itself was delicious. That's my plate. I had a huge chunk of pork as well as some delicious cream cheese and butter. On to the next day. Check out all those jars on my counter. I'm in the middle of a canning project. I'm finally getting rid of some of the tomatoes out of my freezer that have been in there since the fall. I didn't have time to get to it. So after being in the kitchen so much before this day's over, I decided to kind of phone it in my mind, which you'll see that didn't really work out very well. But I wanted to make spaghetti. So what I'm doing to go with it is I'm making a quick sourdough flatbread. The recipe is from Farmhouse on Boone, and it's really simple. So I'm getting all of my ingredients put into my bowl, taking it into the other room, and we're going to get it mixed so it can set for 2 to 4 hours to ferment before going ahead and making the flatbreads over on the stove. Now, over on the stove, I'm getting the meat prepared for the spaghetti sauce itself. I have a pound of ground pork and a pound of ground venison. The guys were able to harvest 3 deer this year, so it's been really nice to have that meat available, and we're working it into all sorts of meals where we would typically use ground beef. What I did was I pulled out half of this meat and set it aside so we could have another quick meal later in the week. I find batch cooking things like this that are super easy to make several different meals out of later throughout the week really helps me with the flow and helps me when I'm tired of cooking, because after all of these meals, I can tell you, you get to that point. But in reality, I actually do love cooking. It's the cleanup that gets me, and batch cooking saves on that too. Now I'm back over to the flatbread, portioning these out into 8 individual sections so we can get them prepared to go over on the stove. The beauty of a flatbread is you don't have to wait through the rise time and you don't have to wait to bake it off. So rolling these out to about a 1/4 inch thick is all that needs to be done to get them ready. Now, I do want to just throw out a word about my little one's shirt here. This is a shirt that my mom saved that I used to wear when I was a kid. It has been in the doll clothes at my mom's house for years now. And recently, my little one latched onto it. It's way too small for her, but it's one of her favorite shirts. She doesn't care that her belly sticks out, and she cannot wait to wear it. So just so you guys know, I know that's way too small for her, but we really just let them do what they want to do as long as we're around the house. On the other side of the table, you just saw my laptop get delivered. My husband actually is calling on his way home from work. He often does this, and this lets us know if he's running late, if he's not going to make it for dinner, or if I need to take one of the boys over to ball practice. So we're having a good chat here, and that's why everybody's kind of gathering around the table and around the computer. They're able to talk to him as well as get their turn to roll out their own flatbreads that we'll be able to throw over on the stove here momentarily. I can tell you it was definitely of interest for them all to make sure they got on the rolling, and it is easier for some than others, but it's always fun to get them involved, and we had a great time getting these rolled out. This is, though, while I said I thought I would be phoning it in for tonight's meal, I thought spaghetti was going to be super easy, but this ended up taking a little more time than I had envisioned when I started this meal. Everybody is always eager to celebrate a job well done, so we got those all rolled out. I did consider editing out some of that footage, but I just couldn't pick any of them to take off. They are so cute, and I love having them on there, and they love seeing themselves on camera. So thank you for holding with us while all of the kiddos got to roll out their dough. Now I just took these over on a hot cast iron. I'm giving them a couple minutes on each side. As you can see, they're bubbling up beautifully. And then once I flip over, I'm adding some homemade garlic powder as well as some mozzarella cheese, folding them over and just making a delicious bread for them to go along with their spaghetti. The rest of this meal actually did finish up quick and easy. So I'm throwing my colander right on top of my pan. I didn't know that for the longest time, but it makes draining so super easy. Then just pulling it straight back off. And here I'm adding some olive oil. Sometimes I add butter, but either way, just some sort of fat that you can toss it in to keep everything from sticking together. As you can see, the kids were super happy. They love spaghetti, and we were able to have leftovers the next day, which I always enjoy. The last meal that I'm going to show you tonight is what we did with that leftover meat. I'm adding a little bit of water to the meat straight out of the fridge, chopping it up, and I'm going to add some taco seasoning. This is my idea of phoning it in, and last night made it possible. My taco seasoning, as well as many others like chili and such, are actually recipes that I blend up at home. So if you're curious about those recipes, make sure to let me know in the comments below, and I'll show you exactly how I make that happen. Over on the counter, we're just putting together a beautiful taco. Somebody wanted a taco bowl, and then the others wanted tacos. You guys know how that goes together. While I'm finishing this up, I just want to thank you guys again. I really can't get over the number of you and just the support that we're getting from showing you guys exactly what we do here around our house and how our kitchen functions. My kiddos, as well as myself, are just overwhelmed with the comments, and we really appreciate you all sticking around. If you're new to the channel, make sure to subscribe. This is going to wrap up week 3 of the Pantry Challenge for us. I really can't believe how fast it's going, and I hope you guys will join us again for week 4. But for now, the kiddos are headed over to have their tacos. I'm going to have my carnivore style bowl, and that's going to wrap it up for us. So for now, bye friends.